The crystalline spires of New Windsor Station gleamed against the backdrop of Earth's azure marble, suspended in the void like a crown jewel among the stars. Admiral Charles Mountbatten Windsor III stood before the massive observation deck, his weathered hands clasped behind his back as he watched the endless parade of starships entering and leaving Earth's orbital space. At 78 standard years, he had seen humanity evolve from a single-world species to the dominant force in 3 galactic sectors, yet today's decision weighed heavier on his mind than any military campaign he had ever commanded. The Terran Royal Navy had become more than just Earth's protection force. It was the backbone of human expansion, the iron fist wrapped in diplomatic velvet that had secured humanity's place among the galaxy's most powerful civilizations. Charles had inherited command from his father, as tradition dictated, but tradition was about to change forever. "Your Majesty," came the crisp voice of Fleet Captain Sarah Morrison, his aide-de-camp. "The Admiralty Council is assembled and waiting for your announcement." Charles turned from the viewport, his uniform bearing the distinctive insignia of the Royal Space Command. The golden eagles on his collar caught the artificial light, symbols of an empire that now spanned hundreds of worlds. "Tell me, Captain, what do you know of the Drakmari situation?" Morrison's expression tightened. "Intelligence reports indicate they're massing fleets along the Proxima border, sir. Their warcast has been making increasingly aggressive statements about human expansion into what they consider their ancestral hunting grounds." The Drakmari were reptilian warriors, standing nearly 10 feet tall with natural armor plating and a culture built entirely around conquest. They had controlled the Proxima sector for over 2 millennia before humanity's first colony ships arrived. Unlike other alien species that had negotiated territorial boundaries with the expanding human sphere, the Drakmari viewed any compromise as weakness. "And the Zephyrian Trade Consortium?" Charles asked, walking toward the conference room. "Growing bold, Your Majesty. They've been pressuring our colony worlds to abandon Terran trade agreements in favor of their economic partnerships. Some of the Outer Rim governors are wavering." The Zephyrians were different from the Drakmari entirely. Tall, ethereal beings with translucent skin and enlarged craniums, they preferred economic warfare to physical conflict. Their vast merchant fleets carried goods across half the galaxy, and they had grown wealthy by creating dependencies among smaller civilizations. They saw humanity's rapid expansion as a threat to their economic dominance. Charles nodded grimly. These were the challenges that kept him awake during the ship's night cycles. Humanity had risen fast, perhaps too fast. In less than 3 centuries since first achieving faster-than-light travel, humans had established colonies on over 400 worlds. Their military technology, born from generations of earthbound conflicts, had proven surprisingly effective in space combat. But, with rapid expansion came new enemies, and the old ways of doing things might not be sufficient for the challenges ahead. The Admiralty Council chamber was a circular room with holographic displays showing the current positions of every major human fleet. 27 admirals sat around the curved table, men and women who commanded everything from patrol squadrons to massive battle groups. These were the individuals responsible for protecting nearly 2 billion humans spread across the galaxy. "Gentlemen, ladies," Charles began, taking his place at the head of the table. "We face unprecedented challenges. The Drakmari grow more aggressive each day, and intelligence suggests they're coordinating with other hostile species. The Zephyrians are undermining our economic partnerships, and reports from the frontier suggest new alien civilizations are taking hostile positions toward human expansion." Admiral Rebecca Foster, commander of the Third Fleet, leaned forward. "Your Majesty, our forces are strong. We've successfully defended against every incursion so far. What concerns you?" Charles activated a holographic display showing the galactic map. Human territory appeared as a brilliant blue, but it was surrounded by zones of yellow, red, and orange indicating various levels of hostility. "We've been reactive, Admiral Foster. Always responding to threats rather than preventing them. Our command structure, while traditional and stable, may be too rigid for the fluid nature of galactic politics." The room fell silent. Several admirals exchanged glances. Admiral James Richardson, the oldest member of the council, spoke carefully. "Sir, are you suggesting changes to the Royal Navy's command structure?" "I'm suggesting something far more radical," Charles replied. "I'm proposing to break a tradition that has guided our military for over 4 centuries." He gestured to another holographic display. This one showed personnel files and fleet positions throughout human space. Our youngest fleet commanders are in their 40s. Our youngest sector governors are in their 50s. We promote based on seniority, experience, and proven capability. These are admirable qualities, but they create a military that thinks in terms of the last war, not the next one. Admiral Morrison, Charles's own daughter and commander of the 6th Fleet, frowned. "Father, what exactly are you proposing?" Charles smiled at her. Even in formal military settings, family bonds remained strong among the royal family. "I'm proposing to give your brother Louis a position that has never been granted to someone so young, so untested, and, frankly, so unconventional." The silence in the room became deafening. Prince Louis was known throughout the fleet as brilliant but erratic. At 28, he had already distinguished himself in 3 major engagements, but his methods often bordered on insubordination. He had a reputation for ignoring established protocols when they didn't suit his tactical vision. Admiral Richardson cleared his throat. "Your Majesty, Prince Louis is undoubtedly talented, but he's also unpredictable. Giving him significant command authority could be dangerous?" Charles finished. "Perhaps. But our current approach isn't working. We're losing ground diplomatically, economically, and strategically. We need new thinking, and new thinking rarely comes from old minds." He activated another display showing recent battle reports. In the engagement at Kepler Station, Prince Louis's squadron was outnumbered 3-1 by Drachmarie raiders. Standard doctrine would have called for withdrawal and reinforcement. Instead, he used an obsolete mining platform as a weapon, ramming it into the enemy formation while his ships fired from concealment. Unconventional? Absolutely. Effective? The raiders were destroyed with minimal human casualties. Admiral Foster nodded slowly. The Centauri incident was similar. He turned a potential disaster into a victory by doing exactly what no one expected. Exactly, Charles continued. Our enemies have learned to anticipate our responses because we've become predictable. The Drachmarie know we'll follow engagement protocols. The Zephyrians know we'll negotiate through proper diplomatic channels. What they don't expect is someone who refuses to play by the established rules. The discussion continued for over an hour. Charles presented his case methodically, addressing every concern raised by the council members. The decision he was contemplating would grant Prince Louis command authority over newly formed rapid response fleets, units designed specifically for unconventional operations. Admiral Sarah Chen, commander of the Frontier Defense Forces, raised a critical point. "Your Majesty, even if we agree that Prince Louis has the tactical brilliance for such a role, the political implications could be severe. The other great houses have been watching our family's influence carefully. Granting unprecedented authority to your youngest son could be seen as consolidating power." Charles had anticipated this objection. The Terran government operated as a constitutional monarchy, with elected representatives handling civilian affairs while the royal family maintained control over military and interstellar relations. Other noble houses, descendants of Earth's ancient aristocracies, held significant influence and wouldn't appreciate being bypassed. The great houses will object, he acknowledged. But they'll object to any significant change in military structure. The question is whether we prioritize political comfort over strategic necessity. Admiral Morrison spoke up. "What specific authority are you considering granting Louis?" Charles took a deep breath. "I'm creating a new position, Lord High Admiral of Expeditionary Forces. It would give him command over all rapid response units, special operations fleets, and frontier reconnaissance groups. Essentially, he would be responsible for anything requiring immediate action or unconventional tactics. The implications were staggering. Such a position would make Prince Louis one of the most powerful military commanders in human space, with authority rivaling that of sector governors and fleet admirals who had decades more experience. Admiral Richardson shook his head. "Your Majesty, with respect, this could destabilize our entire command structure. Officers who have served loyally for decades might resent being placed under someone so young." "They might," Charles agreed. "But they'll resent losing wars to alien civilizations even more. We're approaching a critical juncture in human expansion. The next few years will determine whether we continue growing as a galactic power or begin contracting under pressure from hostile neighbors." He gestured to the holographic display showing fleet positions. "Look at our deployment patterns. 70% of our forces are committed to defending existing territories. Only 30% are available for offensive operations or responding to new threats. We're becoming a defensive civilization, and defensive civilizations eventually lose." The meeting continued well into the ship's evening cycle. Charles presented intelligence reports, tactical analyses, and strategic assessments supporting his position. The council members asked pointed questions, raised legitimate concerns, and debated the implications of such a radical change. Finally, Admiral Foster asked the crucial question, "Your Majesty, have you discussed this with Prince Louis himself?" Charles smiled for the first time during the meeting. "Not yet. I wanted the council's input first. But I suspect he'll have strong opinions about the idea." As the meeting concluded, Charles realized he had successfully planted the seeds of change. The council members weren't entirely convinced, but they were thinking about the problems differently. That was often the first step toward accepting necessary but difficult decisions. Later that evening, Charles stood once again before the observation deck, watching the stars wheeling slowly past as the station maintained its orbit. Somewhere out there, alien civilizations were making their own plans for humanity's future. The question was whether humans would shape those plans or merely react to them. The decision he was contemplating would change everything. It would challenge traditions that had served humanity well for centuries. It would create political controversy and military uncertainty. But it might also provide the flexibility and innovation necessary for humanity to thrive in an increasingly dangerous galaxy. Tomorrow, he would speak with Prince Louis. The conversation would determine not just the young man's future, but potentially the future of human civilization among the stars. Prince Louis Mountbatten Windsor stood in the zero-gravity combat simulator, sweat beading on his forehead despite the climate control systems. Around him, holographic enemy fighters weaved through an asteroid field, their weapons tracking his movements with deadly precision. This wasn't a standard training scenario. He had programmed it himself, creating conditions that pushed both technology and human reflexes beyond normal limits. "Computer, increase enemy response time by 20% and add gravitational anomalies," he commanded, dodging behind a massive rotating asteroid as plasma bolts scarred its surface. His modified fighter responded to neural commands transmitted through the interface crown he wore. Unlike standard pilots who relied on manual controls and verbal commands, Louis had pioneered a direct neural connection that allowed him to think his ship through complex maneuvers. The technology was still experimental, considered too dangerous for widespread deployment, but Louis had been testing it for over 2 years. The simulation intensified. Enemy fighters coordinated their attacks with inhuman precision while gravitational anomalies from a nearby neutron star pulled at his ship in unpredictable directions. Louis smiled grimly. This was exactly the kind of impossible situation humanity might face in real combat against technologically superior enemies. He rolled his fighter through a narrow gap between 2 asteroids, simultaneously firing targeting solutions to his wingmen while analyzing the enemy formation for weaknesses. The neural interface allowed him to process multiple data streams simultaneously, something traditional pilots couldn't match. But the strain was enormous. His heart rate spiked as the system demanded more from his nervous system than evolution had designed it to handle. "Warning, neural stress indicators approaching critical levels," the computer announced. Louis ignored the warning. In real combat, enemy weapons wouldn't pause for human limitations. He pushed harder, driving his consciousness deeper into the ship's systems until the boundary between man and machine became increasingly blurred. The fighter became an extension of his body, its weapons his claws, its sensors his eyes. The breakthrough came suddenly. The enemy formation revealed a microscopic timing delay in their coordination algorithms. Lewis exploited it ruthlessly, threading his fighter through their defensive pattern while his weapons systems locked onto multiple targets simultaneously. In the space of 12 seconds, he destroyed 8 enemy fighters and disabled 3 more. Simulation complete, the computer announced. New record established. Lewis disconnected from the neural interface, his hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline and neural strain. The simulator pod opened to reveal Captain Jennifer Hayes, his longtime friend and the only person brave enough to regularly challenge his increasingly dangerous training regimens. "You're going to kill yourself," she said without preamble. Neural stress readings were off the charts during that final engagement. Lewis wiped sweat from his face with a towel. The neural stress was manageable. "I've been monitoring my own biometrics." "Lewis, you lost consciousness for 3 seconds during the transition phase. The safety systems had to take control of your breathing." He paused, considering this information. "I wasn't unconscious. I was simply processing data at a different cognitive level." Captain Hayes crossed her arms. "That's exactly the kind of rationalization that gets pilots killed. You're pushing the neural interface technology beyond safe parameters." Lewis began removing the interface equipment, carefully disconnecting the neural crown that had allowed direct communication between his brain and the fighter's computer systems. The technology represented a potential revolution in human combat capabilities, but it came with risks that most military commanders considered unacceptable. "Jennifer, in 3 months we've lost 4 patrol squadrons to Drakmari raiders. They're using coordinated pack tactics that overwhelm our traditional defensive responses. Our pilots, no matter how skilled, can't process information fast enough to counter their group dynamics." "So you're experimenting with technology that could cause permanent brain damage?" "I'm experimenting with technology that could save human lives," Lewis corrected. "The neural interface allows processing speeds that match alien coordination patterns. It's not perfect yet, but it's promising." Captain Hayes helped him with the more complex interface components. They had known each other since childhood, growing up together in the royal household. She was one of the few people who could speak to him without military formality, and certainly the only one who regularly argued with his decisions. "Your father has been asking for you," she mentioned casually. "Something about an urgent family matter." Lewis looked up sharply. Admiral Charles rarely interrupted training schedules for family discussions unless the matter was genuinely significant. "Did he indicate what kind of family matter?" "No, but he seemed unusually serious." "Even for him." Lewis finished changing into his regular uniform, exchanging the specialized flight suit for the dress blues of a Royal Navy lieutenant. Despite his technical rank, everyone understood that his position as a member of the royal family created complex command dynamics. He could give orders to officers senior in rank, but he also had to be careful not to abuse that authority. They walked together through the corridors of HMS Intrepid, Lewis's personal command ship. Unlike traditional naval vessels designed for fleet actions, the Intrepid was configured for rapid response and special operations. Its crew of 400 represented the best personnel from across the Royal Navy, handpicked for their ability to handle unconventional missions. "Any thoughts on what your father might want to discuss?" Captain Hayes asked as they approached the communication center. "Probably another lecture about taking unnecessary risks," Lewis replied. "He's been monitoring my training reports." The communication center was a secure facility designed for real-time conversations across interstellar distances. Quantum entanglement networks allowed instantaneous communication between major naval installations, though the technology was expensive and reserved for high-priority communications. Lewis activated the secure channel to New Windsor Station. His father's image appeared in the holographic display, as sharp and clear as if he were standing in the same room. "Lewis," Admiral Charles said without preamble. "We need to talk privately." "I'm alone, sir." "Good. What I'm about to discuss cannot leave this conversation until formal announcements are made." Charles paused, studying his son's face through the quantum link. "I'm considering offering you a position that has never existed before in the Royal Navy." Lewis raised an eyebrow. "What kind of position?" "Lord High Admiral of Expeditionary Forces. You would command all rapid response units, special operations fleets, and frontier reconnaissance groups." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Lewis had expected many things from this conversation, but not this. The authority his father was describing would make him one of the most powerful military commanders in human space. "Sir, with respect, I'm 28 years old with less than 10 years of active service. There are dozens of officers better qualified for such a position." Admiral Charles smiled grimly. "Better qualified in traditional terms, perhaps. But traditional qualifications haven't been serving us well lately. We're facing challenges that require unconventional thinking." Lewis considered the implications carefully. This would create enormous political controversy. The great houses won't appreciate being bypassed for someone so young. The great houses can voice their concerns through proper channels. My primary responsibility is the defense of human space, not managing aristocratic sensitivities. What about the other admirals? Many of them have decades more experience than I do. Experience can be a limitation as well as an asset, Charles replied. Experienced officers tend to fight the last war rather than the next one. You've consistently demonstrated an ability to find solutions that bypass traditional tactical thinking. Lewis paced the small communication chamber, his mind racing through the possibilities and complications. What would my actual authority include? Command over 30 rapid response squadrons, 12 special operations groups, and all frontier reconnaissance units. You would report directly to me, but you would have operational autonomy in choosing missions and tactics. The scope was staggering. Lewis would essentially control the Royal Navy's most flexible and elite units, the forces responsible for responding to emerging threats and opportunities. "Sir, I need to ask directly, why are you offering this to me?" Admiral Charles was quiet for a long moment. "Because I've been watching alien intelligence reports, and I'm convinced we're approaching a crisis that will test everything about human civilization. The Drachmari are coordinating with at least 3 other hostile species. The Zephyrians are building economic alliances specifically designed to isolate human trade. New alien civilizations are emerging from unexplored regions, and their initial contacts suggest hostility toward human expansion." Lewis absorbed this information soberly. "How long do we have before this crisis materializes?" "Intelligence suggests 18 months, possibly less. The aliens are moving carefully, but they're definitely coordinating efforts to limit human influence in multiple sectors simultaneously." "And you believe unconventional tactics will be necessary to counter these threats?" "I believe traditional military thinking will lose this conflict before it properly begins," Charles said bluntly. "We need commanders who can adapt quickly, who can find solutions that our enemies don't anticipate, and who can coordinate new technologies with innovative strategies." Lewis thought about the neural interface experiments, the modified tactics he had been developing, the unconventional training programs he had implemented among his crew. Perhaps his father had been monitoring more than just his training reports. "Sir, if I accept this position, I would want complete authority to implement new technologies and training methods." "Within reason, yes. Including neural interface systems for pilot enhancement?" Admiral Charles hesitated. "The medical board has expressed serious concerns about neural interfaces." "The medical board hasn't seen the tactical advantages in combat situations," Lewis replied. "Sir, our enemies have natural advantages we can't match through training alone. The Drachmari have reaction speeds that exceed human limits. The Zephyrians process multiple information streams simultaneously. We need technological assistance to compete. What are you proposing? Voluntary neural interface programs for elite pilots. Enhanced reaction speeds, improved coordination capabilities, direct mental connection to ship systems. It's not without risks, but neither is losing battles because our pilots can't keep up with alien capabilities. Charles considered this request carefully. Such programs would require extensive safety testing and medical oversight. Agreed. But they should be developed in parallel with traditional training methods, not delayed indefinitely by bureaucratic caution. The conversation continued for another hour, covering tactical doctrine, command structure, political implications, and strategic objectives. Lewis found himself increasingly intrigued by the possibilities, despite the enormous challenges involved. "Sir, I have one final question," Lewis said. "If this crisis unfolds as you predict, what's the best-case scenario for humanity?" Admiral Charles's expression became grim. "The best-case scenario is that we maintain our current territorial holdings while establishing stable borders with hostile neighbors. The worst-case scenario is systematic elimination of human colonies and eventual siege of Earth itself." Lewis felt a chill run down his spine. "And you believe unconventional tactics are our best hope for achieving the best-case scenario?" "I believe they are our only hope for avoiding the worst-case scenario." The conversation ended with Lewis requesting 24 hours to consider the offer. As his father's image faded from the holographic display, Lewis stood alone in the communication chamber, contemplating a decision that would change his life forever. Outside the chamber, Captain Hayes was waiting with barely concealed curiosity. "So," she asked simply. Lewis looked at his oldest friend and realized that accepting his father's offer would change her life as well. As his aide-de-camp and closest advisor, she would be drawn into whatever came next. "Jennifer, how would you feel about helping to save human civilization?" Her expression became serious. "Is that what this is about?" "Apparently so." Captain Hayes nodded slowly. "Then, I guess we'd better not mess it up." The Royal Assembly Hall on New Windsor Station had not witnessed a gathering of this magnitude for over 50 years. Representatives from every major human colony, fleet commanders from across 3 galactic sectors, and dignitaries from allied alien civilizations filled the massive chamber. The crystalline dome overhead provided a spectacular view of Earth hanging in space, a blue and white jewel that reminded everyone present what they were ultimately fighting to protect. Prince Louis stood in a preparation chamber adjacent to the main hall, adjusting the unfamiliar ceremonial uniform he would wear for the appointment ceremony. The gold braiding and ceremonial sword felt strange after years of practical military clothing, but tradition demanded proper presentation for such a momentous occasion. Captain Hayes entered the chamber carrying a data tablet filled with last-minute briefings. "The Zephyrian delegation arrived an hour ago," she reported. "They're attending as observers, but intelligence suggests they're more interested in assessing our internal political dynamics than celebrating your appointment." Lewis nodded, unsurprised. The Zephyrians rarely attended human ceremonies unless they expected to gain valuable intelligence. "Any indication of their specific interests?" "They've been asking subtle questions about command structure changes and whether your appointment represents a shift toward more aggressive policies." "What about the domestic response? Are the great houses maintaining their objections?" Captain Hayes consulted her tablet. House Wellington issued a formal statement questioning the wisdom of bypassing experienced commanders. House Churchill has remained diplomatically neutral. House Roosevelt explicitly endorsed your appointment, though they may be positioning themselves for political advantage. The politics of the appointment had been complex from the beginning. When Admiral Charles first announced his intention to create the position of Lord High Admiral of Expeditionary Forces, the reaction had been immediate and divided. Some viewed it as necessary innovation in the face of growing threats. Others saw it as dangerous precedent that undermined traditional meritocratic advancement within the military. "Sir," Captain Hayes continued, "there's something else you should know. 3 sector governors have submitted formal requests to transfer some of their frontier defense forces to your command." Lewis looked up sharply. Which sectors? Proxima, Centauri, and Kepler. All frontier regions facing increased alien activity. This was unexpected. Lewis had assumed that senior commanders would resist transferring forces to his authority. If sector governors were voluntarily requesting such transfers, it suggested they were more concerned about practical defense needs than bureaucratic protocol. What's the reasoning behind their requests? Governor Martinez and the Proxima sector cites increased Drachmarie raid activity that requires rapid response capabilities beyond her current resources. Governor Chen in Centauri mentions intelligence suggesting coordinated alien economic pressure that needs investigation. Governor Thompson in Kepler specifically requested access to special operations units for missions he couldn't detail in formal communications. Lewis considered these developments. His new command was supposed to focus on rapid response and special operations, but if sector governors were already requesting assistance, it suggested the threats were more immediate than intelligence estimates indicated. Admiral Charles entered the preparation chamber, wearing his full dress uniform with decorations from 40 years of service. Father and son looked remarkably similar, though Charles showed the weathering of decades commanding humanity's expansion into hostile space. "Are you ready?" Charles asked simply. "As ready as someone can be for changing the course of human military doctrine," Lewis replied. Charles smiled grimly. "Your appointment is just the beginning. The real test will be how you use the authority you're being granted." They walked together toward the main hall, passing through corridors lined with portraits of previous Royal Navy commanders. Lewis recognized many of the faces from military history courses, officers who had led humanity through various crises over the past 4 centuries. He wondered if future students would view his appointment as a turning point or a cautionary tale. The assembly hall fell silent as they entered. Nearly 2,000 attendees rose to their feet in a gesture of respect that transcended individual opinions about the appointment itself. Lewis scanned the crowd, identifying faces he recognized from intelligence briefings, political summaries, and military reports. The ceremony began with traditional elements that had remained unchanged for centuries. Charles read the formal articles establishing the new position, outlining its authority and responsibilities. Legal experts had spent weeks crafting language that granted extensive operational autonomy while maintaining proper oversight and accountability. "The position of Lord High Admiral of Expeditionary Forces," Charles announced, his voice carrying clearly throughout the hall, "is created to address emerging challenges that require innovative approaches and rapid response capabilities. This officer will command all units designated for special operations, frontier reconnaissance, and crisis intervention." Lewis listened to the formal language describing his new authority. Command over 30 squadron groups, 12 special operations units, and extensive support infrastructure. The ability to implement new technologies and training programs. Direct access to intelligence networks and diplomatic communications. It was more power than most officers accumulated over entire careers. The political implications were not lost on the audience. Several alien observers took careful notes, undoubtedly analyzing what this appointment might mean for human military capabilities and intentions. The domestic reaction was more mixed, with some attendees appearing enthusiastic while others maintained carefully neutral expressions. When the moment came for Lewis to accept the appointment, he stepped forward to the ceremonial podium. The words he spoke would be recorded in military history and analyzed by allies and enemies alike. "I accept the position of Lord High Admiral of Expeditionary Forces," he said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "I pledge to use this authority in service of human security and the principles that have guided our expansion among the stars." Charles presented him with the ceremonial sword and insignia of his new rank. The sword was more than decorative, it contained quantum encryption keys that would provide access to the most classified intelligence networks and communication systems. "The challenges facing humanity require new approaches," Lewis continued, addressing the assembled crowd. "Our enemies are coordinating in ways we haven't seen before. Our traditional responses, while effective in the past, may not be sufficient for emerging threats. He paused, making eye contact with various attendees throughout the hall. The forces under my command will develop new capabilities, implement innovative technologies, and prepare for scenarios that conventional military doctrine doesn't address. The applause that followed was respectful but not universally enthusiastic. Lewis hadn't expected universal approval, but he was pleased to note that the military representatives seemed generally supportive while the political observers appeared more reserved. Following the ceremony, a reception allowed for informal conversations with key attendees. Lewis found himself engaged in careful diplomatic discussions with alien observers, strategic planning sessions with military commanders, and political negotiations with domestic representatives. Ambassador Keelix of the Zephyrian Trade Consortium approached him with the flowing grace typical of his species. The Zephyrian stood nearly 7 feet tall, his translucent skin revealing the network of bioluminescent organs that allowed his species to communicate through light patterns as well as verbal language. Lord High Admiral, Ambassador Keelix said, his voice carrying the musical overtones of his native language, your appointment represents an interesting development in human military organization. Thank you, Ambassador. The Zephyrian Consortium has always been perceptive about organizational changes. Indeed. We are curious about how your new command structure might affect existing trade agreements and security arrangements. Lewis recognized the careful diplomatic language. The ambassador was asking whether his appointment signaled more aggressive human policies that might threaten Zephyrian economic interests. The expeditionary forces will focus primarily on threats to human security, Lewis replied diplomatically. Our intention is to maintain stability that benefits all peaceful civilizations in the region. Stability is indeed valuable, Ambassador Keelix agreed. We trust that human definitions of stability will continue to align with broader galactic interests. The conversation continued in similarly diplomatic terms, each side probing for information while maintaining polite courtesy. Lewis gained the impression that the Zephyrians were more concerned about his appointment than they were admitting publicly. Governor Martinez from the Proxima sector approached him during a brief break between diplomatic conversations. She was a veteran administrator who had managed one of humanity's most challenging frontier regions for over 15 years. Lord High Admiral, I want to personally thank you for accepting this position, she said without preamble. The situation in my sector has been deteriorating faster than public reports indicate. How can the expeditionary forces assist you, Governor? The Drachmarie raids have become more sophisticated. They're using tactics that suggest detailed intelligence about our defensive patterns. My regular forces are excellent, but they're trained for conventional threats. Lewis nodded. What specific capabilities do you need? Rapid response units that can intercept raiding parties before they reach civilian targets. Special operations teams that can gather intelligence about Drachmarie coordination efforts. And, frankly, commanders who aren't bound by standard engagement protocols when dealing with enemies who follow no rules. This was exactly the kind of challenge Lewis had expected to face. I'll review the situation files and have teams deployed to your sector within 2 weeks. Governor Martinez looked relieved. Lord High Admiral, I've been managing frontier defense for 15 years. This is the first time I've been genuinely worried about losing colonies to alien action. The reception continued for several hours, with Lewis engaged in similar conversations throughout the evening. Military commanders described emerging threats, civilian governors outlined security concerns, and intelligence officers shared classified assessments of alien activities. By the time the formal events concluded, Lewis had gained a much clearer picture of the challenges facing his new command. The threats were more immediate and more coordinated than public briefings had suggested. Human forces were being tested in multiple sectors simultaneously, and traditional responses were proving inadequate. Captain Hayes found him in a quiet corner of the reception hall, reviewing notes from the evening's conversations on her data tablet. Initial assessment? She asked. We're going to be very busy, Lewis replied grimly. And we're going to need to move faster than I initially thought. How much faster? Lewis looked out through the crystalline dome at the stars beyond Earth's atmosphere. Somewhere out there, alien civilizations were making their own plans for humanity's future. The question was whether his new command would be ready to meet those challenges. Fast enough to stay ahead of whatever our enemies are planning, he said finally. Because the alternative is losing everything we've built among the stars. As the reception wound down and attendees began departing for their various destinations, Lewis realized that his real work was just beginning. The ceremony had granted him authority, but authority without effective action would be meaningless. The next morning, he would begin assembling the forces that might determine humanity's survival in an increasingly dangerous galaxy. The appointment was complete, but the test of whether it had been wise was yet to come. 3 weeks after his appointment, Lord High Admiral Lewis found himself standing in the command center of HMS Sovereign, watching real-time tactical displays that painted a grim picture of humanity's first major test under his new command structure. The Kepler colony, home to nearly 2 million human civilians, was under siege by a coordinated alien assault unlike anything in previous military experience. "Sir, we're receiving fragmentary communications from the colony's defense forces," reported Commander Williams, his newly appointed intelligence coordinator. "It appears to be a joint attack involving at least 3 different alien species." Lewis studied the holographic display showing the Kepler system. The attacking fleet consisted of Drakmari heavy cruisers, Zephyrian support vessels, and ships from an unknown alien civilization that intelligence had designated as Species X until proper identification could be established. "How many ships total?" Lewis asked, his mind already racing through possible response strategies. "Initial estimates suggest 60 to 80 vessels, sir. They've established a blockade around Kepler Prime and are systematically destroying orbital infrastructure." Captain Hayes, now serving as his chief operations officer, approached with additional intelligence reports. "Sir, this attack appears to be a test of our rapid response capabilities. The timing and coordination suggest months of planning." Lewis nodded grimly. The aliens had chosen their target carefully. Kepler colony was strategically important but not critical to human civilization. It was far enough from major fleet concentrations that traditional military response would take days to organize. If the expeditionary forces couldn't mount an effective defense, it would send a clear message about humanity's vulnerability to coordinated attacks. "What forces do we have available for immediate deployment?" Lewis asked. 3 rapid response squadrons are within 6 hours of the Kepler system, Commander Williams replied. 2 special operations groups are positioned for infiltration missions. The experimental squadron with neural interface pilots is 4 hours out. The experimental squadron was Lewis's most controversial innovation. Despite medical board concerns, he had authorized voluntary neural interface enhancement for elite pilots. The initial results had been promising, but this would be their first major combat test. "Sir," Captain Hayes said quietly, "standard doctrine would call for waiting until we can coordinate with Sector Command and deploy conventional fleet elements. Standard doctrine would also result in Kepler colony being destroyed while we organize proper responses," Lewis replied. "How long would traditional coordination take?" "Minimum 18 hours for proper fleet deployment, sir." "The colony doesn't have 18 hours. Lewis turned to the communications officer. "Get me direct connection to Admiral Morrison and Admiral Richardson. I need their rapid response units to coordinate with our deployment." The next few minutes were crucial. Lewis had to coordinate not just his own forces, but also work with traditional fleet commanders who might resent taking operational orders from someone so young. The political dynamics of inter-service cooperation could be as challenging as the tactical situation itself. Admiral Morrison's image appeared in the holographic display, her expression tense with concern about the developing crisis. "Lewis, we're monitoring the situation. What's your assessment?" "This is a coordinated test of our response capabilities," Lewis replied without preamble. "They're counting on us following standard procedures that would take too long to save the colony." "What are you proposing?" "Immediate deployment of all available rapid response units, regardless of traditional command protocols." We hit them fast and hard before they can consolidate their hold on the system. Admiral Richardson joined the communication, his decades of experience evident in his careful assessment of the situation. Lord High Admiral, the attacking force significantly outnumbers our immediately available assets. Traditional tactical doctrine would suggest this is an unwinnable engagement. Traditional tactical doctrine doesn't account for the capabilities we've been developing, Lewis said. Sir, with respect, this is exactly the kind of scenario my command was created to address. He activated a tactical display showing his proposed battle plan. The Neural Interface Squadron can coordinate attacks in ways that will confuse enemy targeting systems. The Special Operations Groups can conduct infiltration missions that will disrupt their command structure. The Rapid Response Squadrons can hit multiple targets simultaneously while avoiding concentrated defensive fire. Admiral Morrison studied the plan carefully. This is extremely risky, Lewis. If it fails, we lose significant forces and the colony. If we don't try, we definitely lose the colony, Lewis replied. And we send a message to every hostile species that humanity can be defeated through coordinated action. The debate continued for precious minutes while the situation at Kepler Colony deteriorated. Lewis finally made the decision that would define his command. I'm deploying all available expeditionary forces to Kepler Colony immediately, he announced. Admiral Morrison, Admiral Richardson, I'm formally requesting support from your rapid response units under Emergency Military Protocol 7. Both admirals exchanged glances through the quantum communication link. Emergency Military Protocol 7 allowed for immediate coordination during existential threats, bypassing normal command structures. Approved, Admiral Morrison said after a moment's hesitation. Approved, Admiral Richardson added reluctantly. The next 4 hours were a blur of coordinated activity as human forces converged on the Kepler system from multiple directions. Lewis positioned himself aboard HMS Sovereign at the center of the forming fleet, using real-time communications to coordinate tactical elements across hundreds of light years. Sir, we're approaching the Kepler system, reported the navigation officer. Enemy fleet is maintaining blockade formation around the colony world. Lewis studied the tactical displays showing enemy positions. The attacking force had arranged itself in a defensive pattern that would make traditional assault extremely costly. But Lewis wasn't planning a traditional assault. Launch Neural Interface Squadron, he ordered. Begin Phase 1 of the infiltration protocol. The Neural Interface pilots launched in advanced fighters equipped with experimental stealth systems and direct mental control interfaces. Their mission was to penetrate enemy defenses and gather real-time intelligence about alien coordination methods. Within minutes, the enhanced pilots were providing data streams that would have been impossible to gather through conventional reconnaissance. Their neural interfaces allowed processing of multiple sensor inputs simultaneously, creating a detailed picture of enemy tactical organization. Sir, Commander Williams reported, the neural interface pilots are detecting coordination patterns that suggest the aliens are using some kind of distributed command system. No single command ship, but rather networked decision-making across multiple vessels. This was valuable intelligence. Traditional human tactics focused on identifying and destroying enemy command vessels. If the aliens were using distributed command, those tactics would be ineffective. Adjust attack patterns, Lewis ordered. Target communication nodes rather than command ships. We need to disrupt their networking capabilities. The main assault began 30 minutes later. Rapid response squadrons attacked from multiple vectors while special operations teams infiltrated the enemy formation using experimental cloaking technology. The coordination required split-second timing across dozens of separate units. The neural interface pilots proved their worth during the initial engagement. Their enhanced reaction speeds and coordination capabilities allowed them to exploit gaps in enemy defensive fire that conventional pilots would never have detected. They flew through alien formations like phantoms, striking at communication arrays and sensor nodes while avoiding concentrated defensive fire. Enemy formation is beginning to fragment, reported Commander Williams. Their coordination is breaking down as we disrupt communication networks. Lewis smiled grimly. The aliens had prepared for conventional human assault tactics, but they hadn't anticipated the enhanced capabilities his forces had developed. The neural interface technology, experimental stealth systems, and unconventional tactical doctrines were proving effective against superior numbers. The battle continued for 3 hours, with human forces systematically dismantling the alien blockade through precision strikes rather than direct confrontation. By avoiding conventional fleet engagement, Lewis's forces minimized casualties while maximizing damage to enemy capabilities. "Sir, alien fleet is withdrawing from the system," Captain Hayes reported. "Colony defense forces report the blockade is broken." Lewis felt relief wash over him, but he knew the larger implications were more significant than saving a single colony. Casualty report? 14 fighters lost, 3 ships damaged, no major vessels destroyed, Commander Williams replied. Enemy losses are estimated at over 30 vessels, with significant damage to their coordination capabilities. The victory was decisive, but Lewis knew it was just the beginning. The aliens had tested human rapid response capabilities and found them more effective than expected. They would adapt their tactics accordingly. "Sir," Captain Hayes said quietly, "you've proven that the expeditionary forces concept works in combat. The question now is how the aliens will respond." Lewis nodded, studying the tactical displays that showed enemy ships retreating toward unknown destinations. "They'll coordinate better next time. We need to be ready for evolved tactics." Admiral Morrison's image appeared in the holographic communication system. "Lewis, congratulations on an excellent tactical victory. The colony is secure and enemy forces have been neutralized." "Thank you, sir. But we need to prepare for escalation. This attack was clearly a test of our capabilities." Admiral Richardson joined the communication. "Lord High Admiral, I must admit that your unconventional tactics proved more effective than I anticipated. However, I'm concerned about the precedent this sets for future engagements." "What kind of precedent concerns you, sir?" "If we consistently deploy rapid response forces against superior numbers, we risk creating unsustainable attrition rates. Today's victory was achieved through technological advantages and surprise tactics. Our enemies will adapt." Lewis had anticipated this concern. "Sir, that's exactly why we need to continue developing new capabilities faster than our enemies can adapt to existing ones. The neural interface technology, experimental weapons systems, and unconventional tactics need constant evolution." The conversation continued as they began the journey back to human space, but Lewis's mind was already focused on the next challenge. The victory at Kepler Colony had proven his concepts could work in combat, but it had also revealed the scope of the threat humanity was facing. The aliens had coordinated their attack across multiple species, suggesting a level of cooperation that intelligence services had underestimated. If they could mount simultaneous attacks on multiple colonies, traditional defense strategies would be inadequate regardless of how effective rapid response forces proved to be. 3 days later, Lewis stood once again in his command center, reviewing after-action reports and intelligence assessments. The victory at Kepler had bought time and demonstrated capabilities, but it had also accelerated the timeline for more comprehensive alien action. "Sir," Commander Williams approached with the latest intelligence summary. "We're detecting increased alien communication traffic across multiple sectors. It appears they're coordinating response to our new tactical capabilities." Lewis nodded, unsurprised. "How long before they're ready to test us again?" "Intelligence estimates suggest 2 to 3 months, sir. But the next test will likely involve simultaneous attacks on multiple targets." The challenge was clear. Lewis had proven that rapid response forces could defeat superior numbers through technological advantages and unconventional tactics. Now he needed to scale those capabilities to defend multiple colonies simultaneously while continuing to develop new technologies that stayed ahead of alien adaptation. The first crisis had been successfully resolved, But it was only the beginning of a conflict that would test everything about human civilization's ability to survive among hostile stars. 6 months after the Kepler colony victory, Lord High Admiral Lewis stood before a gathering that would have been unimaginable when his father first offered him command of the expeditionary forces. The assembly hall of the newly constructed Strategic Innovation Center contained not just human military officers, but also representatives from 3 allied alien civilizations, scientists from across human space, and engineers developing technologies that were reshaping the nature of interstellar warfare. The success at Kepler had triggered a cascade of changes throughout human military doctrine. More importantly, it had convinced several previously neutral alien species that humanity's rapid adaptation capabilities made them valuable allies rather than threats to be eliminated. Ladies, gentlemen, and honored alien colleagues, Lewis began, addressing the diverse assembly. 6 months ago, we faced coordinated aggression that threatened to demonstrate human vulnerability to our enemies. Today, we're announcing partnerships that will change the balance of power throughout this galactic region. Ambassador Thylix of the Altarian Republic stood nearly 8 feet tall, his crystalline exoskeleton refracting light into complex patterns that served as both communication and artistic expression. The Altarians had remained neutral for over a century, but the demonstration of human tactical innovation at Kepler had convinced them to reconsider their position. Lord High Admiral, Ambassador Thylix said, his voice resonating through harmonic frequencies that human ears could barely detect, the Altarian Republic is prepared to offer limited military cooperation in exchange for access to your neural interface technologies. This was the breakthrough Lewis had been hoping for. The Altarians possessed shield technologies that were generations ahead of anything humans had developed. Their crystalline ships could absorb and redirect energy weapons with efficiency that bordered on the impossible. The Royal Navy welcomes Altarian cooperation, Lewis replied formally. We believe that combining human tactical innovation with Altarian defensive technologies will benefit both our civilizations. Dr. Sarah Chen, the lead researcher on the Neural Interface project, approached the podium to present the latest developments. Over the past 6 months, her team had refined the technology to the point where neural stress was minimal and enhancement effects had doubled. The latest generation of neural interfaces, Dr. Chen announced, allows pilots to process information at rates exceeding baseline human capability by a factor of 3. More importantly, we've developed group consciousness protocols that allow multiple enhanced pilots to share sensory input and coordinate responses in real time. The implications were staggering. Traditional fighter squadrons operated through vocal communication and visual signals, creating inevitable delays in coordination. Neural interface squadrons could coordinate at the speed of thought, making them nearly impossible for conventional forces to counter. Commander Torres, who had led the Neural Interface Squadron at Kepler, provided a demonstration using holographic simulators. The audience watched as enhanced pilots coordinated complex maneuvers that would have been impossible for unenhanced human beings, threading through defensive formations while maintaining perfect tactical coordination. The enhanced pilots can share tactical awareness, Commander Torres explained. What one pilot sees, all pilots can access. What one pilot learns about enemy capabilities, the entire squadron knows immediately. Captain Hayes, now promoted to Admiral Hayes and serving as Lewis's deputy commander, presented intelligence assessments about alien responses to human tactical evolution. Our enemies have been adapting to our capabilities, she reported. The Dragmari have begun using networked fleet tactics that mirror our own innovations. The Zephyrians are developing economic warfare strategies that target our supply lines rather than engaging our military forces directly. This was the challenge Lewis had anticipated. Military innovation was always a race between developing new capabilities and countering enemy adaptations. The question was whether human creativity could stay ahead of alien responses. However, Admiral Hayes continued, our new alien allies provide capabilities that our enemies haven't encountered before. Altarian shield technology integrated with human tactics creates combinations that no hostile force has faced. The demonstration that followed was spectacular. Altarian ships equipped with enhanced human tactical systems engaged simulated enemy forces using protocols that neither species could have developed independently. The crystalline vessels moved through enemy fire like ghosts, their shields absorbing massive energy discharges while human-designed weapon systems struck with precision that exploited microscopic gaps in enemy defenses. Ambassador Keelix of the Zephyrian Trade Consortium observed the proceedings with careful attention. The Zephyrians had maintained their policy of economic pressure rather than direct military confrontation, but they were clearly concerned about humanity's growing alliance network. Lord High Admiral, Ambassador Keelix said during a break between demonstrations, these technological developments represent significant changes in regional power dynamics. Lewis recognized the diplomatic language. The Zephyrians were concerned that human military capabilities combined with alien alliance partners might threaten their economic dominance. Ambassador, the Zephyrian Consortium has always been welcome to pursue peaceful economic relationships with human colonies, Lewis replied carefully. Our military developments are focused on threats to human security, not economic competition. Indeed. However, enhanced human capabilities might affect the delicate balance that has maintained regional stability. The conversation continued in diplomatic terms, but Lewis understood the underlying message. The Zephyrians were considering whether to shift from economic pressure to direct military action, particularly if human alliance networks continued expanding. Dr. Michael Zhang, the physicist who had developed the experimental faster-than-light communication systems, presented the latest breakthrough in real-time coordination technology. We've successfully tested instantaneous communication networks across distances of up to 50 light-years, Dr. Zhang announced. This allows for real-time tactical coordination between fleets separated by interstellar distances. The implications for military strategy were revolutionary. Traditional interstellar warfare required each fleet to operate independently because communication delays made central coordination impossible. With instantaneous communication, human forces could coordinate operations across multiple star systems as if they were operating in the same solar system. Admiral Morrison, who had become one of Lewis's strongest supporters after the Kepler victory, presented plans for expanding the expeditionary forces structure. Based on the success of Lord High Admiral Lewis's innovations, she announced, the Admiralty Council has approved establishment of expeditionary force commands in all frontier sectors. Each command will include neural interface squadrons, special operations groups, and rapid response capabilities. This represented validation of everything Lewis had been developing. The military establishment, initially skeptical of his unconventional approaches, had become convinced that innovation was essential for human survival in an increasingly hostile galaxy. Captain Williams, now promoted to Admiral Williams and commanding the Intelligence Coordination Center, provided strategic assessments that painted a complex picture of galactic politics. Intelligence indicates that our enemies are forming their own alliance networks, Admiral Williams reported. The Dragmari have established military coordination with at least 5 other aggressive species. The Zephyrians are building economic coalitions designed to isolate human trade relationships. Lewis absorbed this information carefully. The success of human tactical innovation had triggered broader changes in galactic politics. Neutral species were choosing sides, hostile species were coordinating more effectively, and the stakes were escalating beyond individual colony defense to comprehensive civilization survival. However, Admiral Williams continued, our alliance partners are also expanding. The Altarians have convinced 2 other defensive-minded species to consider military cooperation with human forces. Intelligence suggests that our tactical innovations are being viewed as a stabilizing factor by civilizations that prefer negotiation to conquest. The session continued with technical presentations, strategic planning discussions, and diplomatic consultations. By the end of the day, Lewis had a clear picture of how dramatically the situation had changed since his appointment. Human forces had evolved from reactive defense to proactive deterrence. Allied species were contributing technologies and capabilities that exponentially enhanced human effectiveness. More importantly, the galaxy's political dynamics were shifting toward a balance between aggressive expansion and defensive cooperation. That evening, Lewis stood alone in his private quarters aboard HMS Sovereign, looking out at the stars and reflecting on the transformation that had occurred. 6 months ago, he had been an unconventional young officer experimenting with dangerous technologies. Today, he commanded forces that were reshaping the nature of interstellar conflict. Captain Hayes entered his quarters with the final intelligence reports of the day. "Sir, there's something you need to know," she said quietly. "Intelligence has detected massive alien fleet movements in the Vega sector. It appears our enemies are preparing for a coordinated assault that will test everything we've developed." Lewis turned from the viewport. "How massive?" "Over 400 ships from multiple species, sir. The largest coordinated alien military action in recorded history." The final test was approaching. Lewis had proven that human innovation could counter superior numbers and alien advantages in individual engagements. Now he would discover whether those innovations could scale up to protect human civilization against an existential threat. "How long do we have?" he asked. "Intelligence estimates suggest 3 weeks, sir." Lewis smiled grimly. 3 weeks to coordinate the largest human military operation in history, integrate alien alliance partners into combat operations, and deploy technologies that had never been tested on such a scale. "Jennifer, contact all Expeditionary Force commanders, allied species representatives, and sector governors. We're about to find out if everything we've built can save human civilization." As Captain Hayes left to begin the communications, Lewis returned to the viewport. Somewhere out there, hundreds of alien warships were preparing to test whether humanity deserved its place among the stars. The answer would determine the future of human civilization and potentially reshape the balance of power throughout the galaxy. The transformation was complete. Prince Louis, the unconventional young officer who had experimented with dangerous technologies, had become Lord High Admiral Louis, the architect of humanity's evolution into a galactic power capable of defending itself against any threat. The final test would determine whether that evolution had been sufficient to ensure human survival in a universe where civilizations rose and fell based on their ability to adapt, innovate, and fight for their place among the stars.